Video on clean room lighting. Today we're going to be talking about the basic variables that go into the design of a lighting system for a clean room. Now, we've all been in scenarios where the lighting in our environment hasn't worked. Let's say you're working late at night and all you have is your desk light and you're trying to do your statics homework, but it's casting a shadow on your page. Or let's say you go into a classroom where there's a big glare that's being put on the screen where the presentation is being given. In each of these scenarios, poor lighting design is getting in the way of doing your work. So how do we ensure that the lighting we're installing in a clean room is adequate? Today, I'm going to be talking about two main aspects of lighting design. The first is the amount of light. This is a reference to how many light fixtures are you installing. And the second is the location of the light. Are they all above your head? Are they to the side? Are they on the desk? When we're done with that, I'll give you a basic feel of other factors that go into lighting design. So first, when it comes to the amount of light that is required, we often use the term foot candles. This is a measurement of roughly the intensity of the light, and its technical measure is lumens per square foot. So to give you an idea of the amount of foot candles required in different environments, you can imagine your typical office environment, and we're looking there at roughly, 30 to 75 foot candles, and we'll do foot candles that way. Now let's imagine that instead of a typical office where you're just doing basic paperwork, let's say it's a detailed office in the sense that you're doing detailed work, and that might include drafting or fine artistic work or drawing cartoons, something like that. And there we're looking at maybe 100 to 150 foot candles. Finally, one can imagine that if you're doing some fine handwork, that could be something like sewing, or it could be some sort of bench work where you're working with your hands, you're looking at up to 300 foot candles. Now there's a fair bit of calculations that go into getting this right, but for the purpose of this project right here, what does that look like? What's our rule of thumb? And the rule of thumb here is we're going to assume that you're doing light fixtures in the ceiling, and let's imagine you have 10% coverage for the office, would probably give you about 30 to 75 foot candles, all the way down to 35% coverage if you need fine handwork. So in other words, if you're using light fixtures in the ceiling, maybe 10% coverage, in other words, the entire ceiling is 10% covered with light, would be adequate for an office. And if you have fine handwork in manual labor or at a bench, you're looking at 35% or over a third of your ceiling covered with lights. Now, the second item we're going to talk about is location. Generally, overhead lights are ideal for an office setting. They're relatively diffuse. They simulate the type of experience we like having with sunlight overhead, and they provide adequate coverage. This is from one location from above. We call this general lighting. It's lighting the entire space. However, anytime we're dealing with detailed work, which down here is not your office work, but where you're doing technical work with your hands, or you need to, say, doing inspections, see things clearly, the second thing we add is task lighting. This is brighter lighting that's focused on the work we're doing to give clearer illumination. What I've done here is I've included the rough sketch from your worksheet of what a sample clean room might look like. And here you have a workspace right here and some storage areas. And what I haven't shown is, you can imagine the ceiling right here, and that's going to have a lot of your light. So let's move things around a little bit here so we can take a closer look. And now let's take a look at the ceiling plan right here. You can see that the ceiling is separated into 2x4 grids. This is the general way that ceilings are done in clean rooms, and actually in office spaces pretty much everywhere, because it provides a standardized layout for various equipment. For instance, here we have the X of the lights, and as well the interesting symbol of the X with dashes for the supply air filters. I should note that in clean rooms, because they're more specialized, 2x2 grids are also used. So what I've done here is I've included two light, and we call these troffers, 2x4 lights. And these lights are going to provide the lighting for this entire space. You don't need a calculator to see that my coverage is roughly 33%. So this back up here, when we're doing our bench work or working on the workstation, that should provide adequate light. However, what I haven't included here is task light. And actually, in the sketch, you can imagine that the walls are actually clear and the surrounding space is well lit. And that provides adequate lighting for many hand tasks. So you can imagine this working well for, say, simple packaging, but it would not be adequate for, say, some really fine handwork where you need that focused lighting. So these are the basic things that you'll need to know for this project. However, it's worth noting that there's other aspects to lighting that I've completely left out here. So while I won't require you to use these variables in this project, it certainly would add some style. For instance, these numbers right here, you can somewhat depend on those, the foot candles required for specific work. But this rule of thumb, this is a basic guideline I've given here. In real projects, you need to calculate the number of foot candles at the space, which is a function of, say, things like the wattage of your light source, the density of your light source. How many of them do you have? It's also a function of the height of the workspace. How much of the light reaches the workspace? This is a question of focus. In addition, you have to think about the heat of the light source. This is going to incur additional load on your HVAC system. You're going to have to think about cleaning the lights. How will you maintain them? You'll need to consider the spectrum of the light. You can sense this when you go outside and you sense the warmth of the sun, not in temperature-wise, but the goldness to it, and contrast that with the type of lighting you see indoors generally. One thing we haven't even considered yet is cost. This is a function of the energy use, the lifetime of the light, its initial cost, and how much it costs to maintain. Another aspect of lighting design is glare and reflectance. Similar to my initial example of trying to watch a presentation and seeing glare from one of the lights. Finally, many of these design factors are dependent on how the space is used. So one can imagine that here I have a workspace that's designed for basic work, but let's say somebody comes along and says, I want to make this a really fine motor skill area where they're doing some benchtop milling or they're doing some inspection. My lighting design needs to be able to account for those variable demands on it. So in summary, I've given you two basic variables that I want you to consider for this project: the amount of light that is required for different activities, as well as the location of the light, whether or not you need general or task lighting. In addition, we've also mentioned that in actual lighting design projects, there's quite a number of other characteristics that need to be considered to execute a good design. I hope this leaves you a little more illuminated, and I look forward to seeing how you use this in your cleanroom design.